You are listening to the Enormocast.
So what do you approach in your approach shoes? El Cap, the Diamond, the Traps? How about Supercrack Buttress or the Mushroom Boulder in Waco? And what about your mailbox, your job, the local coffee shop? Have you ever approached something scary, awe-inspiring, or heartbreaking in your approach shoes? Or do you walk in beauty like the night of cloudless climbs and starry skies? Climbers do everything from wide cracks to wedding vows in their approach shoes. Not to mention hike, scramble, and lead those last few pitches in the dark. So why not get an approach shoe that can handle it all and look great doing it, like the TX4 from Sportiva? The mighty TX4 approach shoe sports a sticky sole, leather upper, bomber rand, and unbeatable build, as we'd expect from Sportiva. So whether you're bombing up some trail to paradise in the pre-dawn light or just kicking around town feeling the afterglow, why not approach everything with style in the TX4 from Sportiva?
We gotta get
Listen, where are you playing in town? Are you playing here?
We're doing the Enormo Dome, whatever it is. It's terrific.
Oh,
It's
yeah,
a
big
house. We
place,
sold
that
it out.
side of town. That's a
Very
big
nice.
place. You sold
What's
it
that,
out.
20,000 seats? We really should.
The hell are you doing? I couldn't sleep. I'm checking the ropes. There was a frayed end on your rope, and I'm cutting it out.
Bad weather. Now or later, anytime.
Today's show is brought to you by Black Diamond Equipment, with support from Maxim Ropes.
And the fine folks at La Sportiva. And don't forget our charter sponsor, Bonfire Coffee. Go to bonfirecoffee.com and enter Enorma at checkout for a discount on great coffee and to support the Enormocast.
And now back to the show.
Hello and welcome to the Enormocast. This is your host, Chris Kalous. It is February 25th, 2020, about 10 p.m. here in Colorado. And on today's show, episode 193 of the Enormocast, is a bona fide legende, Mr. George Lowe III. So this is sort of a bucket list interview. You know, when I started this thing, did I imagine that I would sit down face to face with some of the true deep legends of the sport, especially of alpinism? No, I didn't. I thought maybe I'd interview some of my friends and we'd have a few yucks. And, it would last a few months. And then like most blogs or things like that at the time, it would just peter out and die. But here I am, some 10 years later, almost, talking to George Lowe, a climber that I've admired. I've followed in his footsteps in many, many cases. He was a great and very important inspiration to my friend Hayden Kennedy, kind of your friend too, actually, if you've listened to the show for a long time. An interesting and truly great climber from an era when a lot of mountaineers and alpinists had just as much acumen and accomplishments in other paths that they were on in other parts of their lives, like intellectual pursuits and career. And some of you might be thinking, Kalous, which Lowe is George Lowe? Well, we get into that a bit in the interview, actually, right in the beginning. But the important takeaway is he was cousins to Jeff Lowe, who passed away not too long ago. Great climber in his own right, and also not related to Alex Lowe, also a great climber that is no longer with us. However, for you deep historians, he doesn't bring it up, so I don't think he's related to the George Lowe that was on the 1953 Everest expedition resulting in the first ascent. So there you go. The lowdown on the Lows. Lots of Lows to keep up with. Definitely not involved with the hardware store. Though I wish he was. I'd definitely hit him up for a new hammer drill. Hey Lows, shout out for you. Hook me up. And this is a pretty solid interview, about an hour, 10 minutes, that I got at George's house up above Golden, Colorado. But to frame it for you folks that may not know exactly who George Lowe is, and also we just couldn't even hardly scratch the surface in an hour 10, I'm going to just run down the greatest hits here for you. First of all, he was putting up 510D in 1965, which he rated 5.9, of course, because that's what you did. And it also was rivaling anything going on anywhere, just about. Did the first winter ascent of the north face of the Grand Teton in 1968, south face of the Devil's Thumb in 1973, the first ascent of the Infinite Spur on Mount Foraker, legendary, with Michael Kennedy in 1977. But hold on here, I almost missed one. The first ascent of the north face of the North Twin in the Canadian Rockies, 1974. Shame on me, but shame on you for not knowing that already. Then, of course, the North Ridge of Laytok 1, talk a bunch about in the interview, 1978. First ascent of the Kangshan Face on Mount Everest, so he's an Everest summiter. At the time, probably the hardest route on the mountain in 1983 from the Chinese side. A solo ascent of Dwalagiri in 1990. 2015, climbed Mount Huntington. He was only 70 years old, no big deal. And just before that, I'm pretty sure that him and Donini did an attempt on the nose in a day. I think they fell a little bit short of 24 hours or a little bit past 24 hours, but they still did it in a push. I think Donini was like 70 and George is 69 or something like that. Anyhow, guy's getting after it. Went to Antarctica last year to ski. So not slowing down, this guy, despite some complaints about his body failing him. It's going to happen. So anyway, I wanted to position you guys, you younger listeners, or maybe the folks that aren't so steeped in the lore, for who George Lowe is, why he's important. But that's why you come to the Enormocast, isn't it? To get steeped in the lore, the juicy, salty, murky lore. Lore juice. All right. As Marty DeBurgi said, enough of my yakking. Let's boogie. When you think about it, is there another gear company so dedicated to outfitting climbers from head to toe as Black Diamond? They've got lightweight modern helmets and headlamps for your pointy head, high-performance apparel to wrap that sweet climber bod you've been cultivating, all the way down to their line of advanced climbing shoes for those tender piggies. They've got crash pads for the pad sniffers, the best protection money can buy for the trad dads, ice tools for the masochists. Pitons, haul bags, portal ledges, backpacks, draws, beaners, harnesses, tents, probes, skis, poles, and even the signature Enormocast rhinestone-studded unisex microfleece G-string. Well, no, that doesn't exist yet, despite me stuffing the suggestion box every chance I get. So next time you're shopping for, well, nearly anything a climber could want, honor the generations of weary Black Diamond engineers poring over AutoCAD in their cubicles when they'd much rather be climbing. And go to blackdiamondequipment.com or your favorite local shop to see the fruits of their dedicated labor. And remember, Black Diamond is a proud sponsor of the Enormocast. First of all, again, I just did off the mic, but thanks for having me up to your place.
I'm happy to have you here. I mean, it's a comfortable place for me, so that's great.
Yeah, it's awesome. And I'm kind of on the road, so I do these things all over the place, and but down in Boulder, it's sometimes tricky to find a quiet place to do it. When we're not in Boulder, we're up above Golden. But again,
the wind that's coming in now may make it difficult here.
Well, I don't mind. Lends that mountain feel to it all. Can we open a window or something? No.
We can open a window. You'd hear the wind
for sure. So I have a notorious kind of thing. I talk about how I don't do any research for these things, and I didn't totally need to with your climbing resume. I have a pretty not a full knowledge of it, but I kind of know the greatest hits, and we have plenty of mutual friends, and I've been an admirer. But the other thing that I did this time, which is a little different, because I don't always like to tip my hand to the audience, because if I say I'm going to do an interview and then for some reason it doesn't happen, like the weather today is terrible. If I'd have been coming from the west side, I probably wouldn't have gotten here. But I did this time, and I just said, hey, if I were to interview George Lowe, what would you guys want to hear about? I don't know. I got comments into the 40s and basically everything. So it wasn't actually that helpful, but because they wanted to know, everything. We'd be here for like 2 days. We'd have to do it in real time. But there was a real big interest in every part of your climbing career. People want to know what you do for a living, which from some inside sources, I've been told you can't tell me or else you'd have to kill me or something to that effect. But
it's pretty close to that.
Okay. What sort of line of thinking are you in terms of work?
I'm actually, I was trained as a physicist. I actually got out in cosmic rays. That's what I wrote my thesis on.
Okay.
Muon showers deep underground at a detector in Park City, Utah, and looking at the dispersion of the muons and trying to get an idea of what the strong force, the nuclear force, was as these very high energy cosmic rays came in the atmosphere. So, and I haven't done a thing with it since I wrote my thesis.
Okay.
And I couldn't find a job in academics, and I ended up going in system engineering for a little company called ESL, which was run by a guy named Bill Perry, who was also Secretary of Defense eventually in Bill Clinton's administration, and a really brilliant scientist. And so I ended up getting a lot into fields like digital signal processing, which I sort of learned on my own. And ESL had done a lot of work in areas, and this is in their statements that they put out at the time, for example, on strategic arms limitation for things like the START Treaty. And so you got to get information to make sure the other guys are not cheating. And so I've been in the defense industry, not necessarily in that area, but this one area where ESL published something that I could say that I was involved with.
Okay.
How I was involved, I can't tell you.
Right. Okay. So yeah, that's kind of what I sort of guessed in terms of just what the kind of things you're working on, and at all levels things get put underground and we don't really hear about them. But the more important part of that, I think, in terms of what we want to talk about, is the fact that you're probably one of, in my estimation, American climbing's most prolific alpinists and climbers in terms of first ascents. And I mean, you're in the echelon with Becky and all these guys, as far as I'm concerned. You're rolling your eyes. People, there's a podcast, so you can't see it. But, I'm just paying it out as compliments. And yet you had this, established and obviously deep career. You had have a family, and raised a family. So one of the questions that kept coming up was about that sort of balance. So at some point in this, I don't know if it's time to talk about that right now until we talk about your climbing, but that's something that people were really interested in, and it feels a little bit old school. There were so many mountaineers and alpinists and stuff of your generation that did go on to have these highly intellectual careers. Were you inspired by other people, or in terms of that, or was it just life decisions? It just seemed like a normal thing to do both?
Well, both things. I mean, you look at people like Tom Hornbein, who had an incredible career professionally, and he, was the driver behind the West Ridge on Everest. And he did a lot of the first ascents, and he's continued to be active in the Alpine Club and still is active. He's retired from his profession, but he's still doing things. Or Lou Reichardt. There are a number of other people.
Right.
Lou has done some, new routes on Everest and K2 and Nanga Devi. That's not bad.
Right.
And Lou is an incredible neurobiologist. And on top of that, and he has a delightful family. All of these kids they go to places like Yale and Harvard, and he's the type of person that I've admired is Tom Hornbein. And these were the sort of people that I would have considered, well, Lou is almost a contemporary. He's not much older than I am. And Lou has this vast breadth of knowledge. I went to Asia with him to climb Everest, and, he knew everything about the Tibetan culture. And that was, not everything, but he was incredibly knowledgeable. And I just have admired people like that who can manage to do both things. Another guy is Henry Kendall. And, I'm in the Henry Kendall Society in the Union of Concerned Scientists, because I have a lot of concerns as a scientist about what is happening to our environment. And I think it's terribly important that we try to bring those scientific facts to the public and hopefully take advantage of the expertise these people have. So these sort of things have driven me. And I'm still working at age 75, half-time, and it's not necessarily, certainly not as productive as I was, but I'm not as productive a climber as I was. But I still like it. And it keeps my mind, it's just like training my mind, and I still climb because I need to train my body. If you want to be productive all your life, it's nice to be able to do these things. So, and I still love getting out climbing. I don't climb like I used to, but I have maybe more fun.
Right.
I'm not driven by, I obviously am not climbing what I climbed years ago.
Mm-hmm. Well, cool. I think we'll keep that on the plate, this idea of this balance as we talk a little bit about your actual climbing. And one other kind of little bit outside question that I wanted to get straightened out, and people sort of half jokingly ask this question, but can you explain the Lowes to me? Who's who? Who's related? Sure. And let's just get that straight, because even at my knowledge of the sport, I'm like, okay, I don't remember how they're related, but I know Alex is not related to you.
Yeah,
but you're related to the other ones.
Alex, in my mind, has superior genetic material.
Okay.
And Alex was, in addition to being an incredibly gifted climber and he was delightful to climb with, he was also very gifted intellectually. I mean, he's a mathematician, and he had a lot of other skills as well. And he chose to put more of his energy in climbing, but he is totally unrelated.
Right.
Then I had my brother Dave, who did a fair amount of climbing, and Jeff, who's everybody knows, who's a cousin. Okay. And Greg, who's basically behind the original Lowe alpine systems, and very inventive guy, and was climbing 512 back in 1965 or something like that in Ogden. He's sort of not well known, but he was incredibly good climber. And Mike, who I did a lot of climbing with, all of these are cousins who are sons of my Uncle Ralph, and of course they all set age records respectively on climbing, the youngest climber to climb the Grand Teton. Okay. So I do come from a climbing family. I climbed the Grand with my father and my son many years ago, when my father was about 65 and my son was about 11. So it sort of runs in the family. I climbed the Grand Teton as my first peak with my cousin Mike and my two brothers, John and Steve. So the whole family's been active in the outdoors, not necessarily in climbing. We did a lot of river running when I was growing up. I mean, I think I've probably been through the Grand Canyon 6 or 7 times back in the days when permits were not a big issue. Right. So the families, between my dad and my Uncle Ralph, we did a lot of things. We did a lot of things together, and it was been a lot of skiing together. Mm-hmm. So like Jackson area and the Wasatch, is that where you're from? Is that where the family's based? I grew up in Ogden. And okay. The other Lowes, as we called them, and they, of course, called us the other Lowes. They only lived probably 2 kilometers away or so. And so we could walk back and forth to places, and we just did a lot of things together. Right. Yeah, because your name's all over the Wasatch for climbing. And the Wasatch was sort of the place that I didn't start climbing there, but I did in some sense to be my Uncle Ralph took us out bouldering when he was training his kids to climb the Grand Teton and put a rope on us. So I had some introduction there. But the Wasatch is where I really started rock climbing seriously, and then the Tetons are sort of my home mountain range because they're the closest mountain range in terms of, they have significant peaks other than the Wasatch. And the Wasatch has great climbing and great skiing. Right. Yeah, of course. So, as an evolution of, growing up this way, it seemed natural then to just continue on to sort of, quote unquote, the greater ranges as I think Chenard put it at some point in a long essay was, obviously you didn't have probably any resistance of I hear a lot of the typical thing of like, well, this is all fun, but it's time to buckle down and become a real person. What was your evolution out of being a kid and getting brought up stuff by your uncle and your dad maybe to kind of finding your own way in the mountains? Well, I originally went down to college in Southern California. I'd been skiing 40 times a winter at home and, done some amateur ski racing. Right. I was on a high school ski team, this sort of thing. Our whole family skied a lot. And I went down to Harvey Mudd, and it was right in the middle of Claremont and the center of the smog, and I hated it, frankly, in terms of the environment, and I wasn't prepped for it because the high school I went to was not great. And so all these prep kids had come in, And so I was struggling at college, and I hated being in Claremont. And these crazy people were going rock climbing, but they were getting out of the city. And so I started climbing, actually climbing rocks there, and places like Big Rock and Talkeets. And then after 2 years at Harvey Mudd, I decided I wasn't doing very well. I moved to the University of Utah, and then, boy, you have all the little Cottonwood Canyon, big Cottonwood Canyon, and it's all really close, and you can do it after class or before class, and it just was a great area to really expand. And we were very fortunate. There was a little climbing club called the Alpine, which climbed out of there, and I sort of joined them, and they'd done a number of first ascents, and I sort of got into this going climbing. Oh, there's a new line, let's go try that. So,
and what about give me a time frame?
Well, I started climbing probably end of 64 in the Wasatch and 65 type things, and there were some people doing some winter mountaineering there as well. I had a really good climbing partner that died on an early climb. We were attempting a little Cottonwood Canyon in 1965, just after I'd come back from Europe for my first real alpine adventure, and who I did quite a number of first ascents with in Little Cottonwood Canyon. So,
what was his name?
Mark McQuarrie.
Okay.
And it was just high school, basically, getting out of high school. Right. A bright young kid, a lot of promise, a little bit. Wasn't doing great in school, but I think climbing has helped a lot of people. Has hindered a lot of people in terms of. But
I mean, I hear that. I luckily, with this program, I hear that story more, the good story more than the bad story, because I never end up talking to the bad story. But because they're not in climbing anymore. But the good story, it really is, and especially I think if you went back to that far, I mean, it was a big draw as still a subculture and a counterculture to a certain extent.
It was. I mean, I used to know everybody who climbed in Salt Lake.
Right.
It was a nice, small community. It was great.
So you Talkeets, I mean, Southern California, if you sort of lump in, I mean, even like Earl Robbins and stuff was from down there, learning his way at Stony Point and stuff like that.
Oh, I climbed at Stony Point too.
Yeah. So have I. It's probably a little different than when you were there, but
it's pretty urban even.
Yeah, okay. There's still broken glass everywhere.
Yes.
Okay.
You got it.
You climbed a little bit at Talkeets, or at least in our lore, our mythology, we think of that place as kind of this very advanced area for rock climbing. And we don't, at least in the 60s, lump the Wasatch in. Did you find that you sort of brought any new ideas back to the Wasatch, or weren't you there long enough to be influenced?
I wasn't there long enough. I really learned when I was going to school in Southern California. And, this is back in the days of soft iron pitons.
Right.
So it was quite different. I did take one long fall in Talkeets when I had a soft iron piton pull. We were pretty incompetent.
Right.
Because the training wasn't really, I can't remember when Blaine, the leader, came out, and all these sort of safety booklets that came out of partially of the old Sierra Club rock climbing sections. Mm-hmm. But I did see some of these things, and I can't my memory's not good enough to bring out those details.
Yeah.
But I didn't really start pushing my own limits. Well, I pushed my own limits down there, but wasn't pushing my own limits where they're really were close to. Well, I'm not sure they ever got up to standards of 1910 when what's his name, Oliver Perry Smith was climbing in Europe and climbing 510.
Right.
We thought the hardest thing was 5'9". Well,
right. Yeah, but half of your 5'9s are like now 5'11". So
it's 5'11". I can't climb it.
Okay, never that's the problem with your grading system. Anybody who's climbed anywhere on old 5'9s, you're like, oh God, this is only 5'9" because they just didn't think
we didn't know
the number could go any higher.
That's right. That was a
mathematically there was a problem.
Yeah, well, yeah, right. I had a little bit of that, and I would have preferred Ortenberger's system where they did an F1 through as far up as you wanted to go.
Right.
because the old Sierra Club 5 class doesn't really mean anything anymore.
Right.
But in any case, it works. It doesn't matter. But there was a lot of that when I was climbing in Little Cottonwood. There was not very much communication with the rest of the climbing world in terms of, experiencing other places. And we were pushing things that were harder than we'd climbed. But, 5'9" was the hardest thing we knew about,
right.
So it was 5'9". And maybe we thought we were exaggerating there.
Right. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
But you don't know.
Right,
It wasn't. Yeah. I don't think any of it was deliberate sandbagging. It was just, don't know.
It was like, we have this connectivity now, knowing about, everything that goes on within hours of it happening, literally. But, it definitely was these sort of little laboratories.
Little separated laboratories.
And the Wasatch was one of them, maybe not as famous, but certainly now that, everything's caught up and we know what's going on, it was certainly, the whole Lowe clan came out of there and started climbing all around the world, at least a few you guys did. So it was certainly a fervent laboratory.
It was.
As anywhere else.
And we had great resources with rock. I felt so fortunate to grow up in those days when, basically only the Grand Teton and the Tetons had been climbed in the winter. And all these new routes in the Wasatch and lots of new routes to be done in the winter. You just look at a piece of rock and say, ooh, that's a pretty line. Let's go climb it.
Right.
And, it was a first ascent.
Right.
And it was, feel very fortunate.
So as you're coming up and you said you went over to Europe and probably, I'm going to make a guess that like you're sort of steeped in the lore or were you like in terms of
moderately, I read the Red Buffalo books and those sorts of things, but I was really fortunate when I went to Europe in 1965. I was staying in Snell's campground, which was just a squalid group of tents where there was not very good control of the sanitation, and it was fairly squalid. But I met all these British climbers, Chris Jones, so I ended up doing a lot of climbing, Nick Escort, Mick Burke, Mike Kosterlitz, who won a Nobel Prize in physics or math. Later, I was just, whoa, where did this come from? And I was very fortunate I got in with these people, and they were much more aware in Chamonix of what could and could not be done, or where the standards of the day were. And that's the first time that I ever really had a perspective. But I'm not sure, even there, I was figuring out what was going on in terms of the relative grades of rock climbs and things like that. Mm-hmm. But I just got in with a really good group of people, and despite the fact we had a really bad weather season, they called it the green winter that time, I managed to get up a lot of routes, and it was enormous jump from being sort of a rock climber to becoming an alpinist.
So this is 1965, is that what you
yes.
said? And you're what, like 18?
Oh no, I think I was 20 or 21.
Okay, all right.
21,
so
yes.
Just old. Yeah, already
getting old.
Yeah, but that's sort of. And this was like on a holiday from like a summer from
I
university.
I took the summer off from
okay.
between the university. And I had it was a fabulous summer, and I managed to explore some of the rest of Europe. But I basically camped out in Chamonix the whole summer, and we just waited till the weather forecast in the Bar National area was semi-good, because you didn't ever know how good the weather forecasts were, and went to try to find a climb.
And how did you feel like, again, coming from this laboratory, as I called it, a little bit isolated, although you're climbing on the Teton too, and that sort of stuff. How did you feel like your skills measured up to some of these folks that you met there, who went on to have also incredible climbing careers?
It was interesting. I didn't feel, initially they had certainly had a lot more ability to judge what was going on in the mountains than I did, because they'd been there before.
Right.
And there were some people like Bonington and people like that, and Willens, who were dropping by the campground occasionally. So I saw some of the quote, big stars. But I think actually the people I was climbing with from Great Britain were as as good as any of the climbers in Britain. I was really fortunate to fall in with these guys, and I think we were climbing on reasonably comparable levels by the end of the season. By the end of the, I did the Menotti Pillar, for example, with Chris Jones. Unfortunately, I did it, and now it's unfortunately fallen away.
Right.
And did a number of climbs like that, and we even tried to do the Central Pillar Frene, and we got really high on it, but, it was trying for a second ascent, and we knew what had happened to Menotti a few years ago, and his crew, and all these people had died, and we got up to a couple pitches from the top, right at the crux. Weather was still starting to creep in a little bit, and we were scared, and we turned around. Turns out it would have been good enough to finish it because we bivouacked quite low on the climb. On the way down, we managed to go all the way up to the crux and probably could have finished it in a day. Mm-hmm. But it was one of those things, you see the weather coming in, people like Menotti, who is incredibly well known, had nearly died there, and you say, I think I'm going to go down.
Right, yeah. Climb again another day.
Well, that's, and that to a great extent, I'm not as good as I should have been in deciding when to turn around, but it's a lot more important to keep climbing and enjoying it than perishing it, and being foolish. And I think the other thing that's really, I was very fortunate in terms of growing up, is that I just sort of went through the apprenticeship process in a fairly seamless way, going, from rock climbing to some stuff in the Tetons to going to Chamonix and learning how to alpine climb and handle ice with relatively primitive gear at the time. You didn't have all the ice axes had straight picks and so on like that. But going through that whole process of learning, so you are not pushing yourself so far beyond your limit that you get yourself in trouble. It's just like when I was talking to Uli Steck a couple of years ago and about Annapurna. Now, I have questions about whether he actually did it, but he talked very carefully about the fact that he didn't think he could do that sort of thing again because he was way too close to the edge. And you have to, as you extend your skill level, that you can get closer, but you've got to be fully aware of the consequences. And of course, today you can push it a lot harder because you have better knowledge. The weather forecasts are, Chamonix or weather forecasts were a joke.
In 1965.
It's 1965.
You just looked up into the sky, right?
Well, no. It might do reasonably well 12 hours in the future, and you could sometimes predict good streaks, but it wasn't great. Whereas now, people fly from here to Patagonia and go climbing based on a weather forecast, which is wow. And so that's enabled people, in my mind, to push a lot harder now, because if you can go really light, you can go really fast. But if you get caught out in really light, you could die. And, from my perspective, I don't think I'll be a successful climber unless I die from some other cause other than climbing.
Right.
Because it's not important whether you get to the summit, it's important that you come back. And so I was just very fortunate. I ran into a really good group of people over those years, and they were at skill levels sort of comparable to mine, and they really worked.
Right.
I think a lot of it's luck.
Yeah, well, the alpine, a lot of it does end up being luck. And, you probably consider yourself pretty lucky considering, just that matter of odds of being out there as much as you've been out there over the years. Well, it can just literally catch up with you.
That's right. You see so many of these guys who, when you really expose yourself on even a daily basis, the odds that you're going to die in the mountains goes up. And depending, rock climbing, sport climbing, probably not much you can do that all the time. And if you are always watching what you're doing, I think the risk is pretty low. You step up to alpine climbing and the range like the Tetons, well, with today's weather forecast, probably not too much worse, but you have odds, higher odds of rock fall, you do have weather things, all these things change, and you go to the Himalayas where you have altitude and
And
much
snow
higher
conditions,
objective
yeah.
danger.
Seracs,
all those types of things, your odds of dying in the mountains go up, and you have to be more conservative if you want to have what I would call a successful career. You want to be more conservative about your approach to the peaks. So it meant that when we were on Latak 1, we took we had 17 days of food. Well, we had enough stuff that we were going to survive if there's some big storms, and we did. And people who are going up, like a lot of people are going these days, who go incredibly light, I think you're skating a little bit close to that edge, and you do that enough times, probabilities can get to you.
Yeah, I mean, I actually kind of I was just thinking about Latak, because when we talked about luck, and you were talking about having the wherewithal to get to the edge but not go over it, right away in my head, I feel like that's a place where you either went over the edge and lucked out, or got as close as many things I can think of in your career. So that was in 1977 or so? 78. And, maybe a culmination. It's kind of just this natural thing to climb harder things, climb bigger things. It seems like it's just part of like the archetype of what you do as an alpinist. And so you guys get to that, and can you maybe just, I've actually never talked about it really that specifically on the podcast, even though, Jim's been on, Danini's been on.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Yeah, Danini, you Jeff Lowe, and then Michael Kennedy.
Yeah.
And so I've had Jim on. We didn't really talk too specifically about it. I've talked in private with Michael about it, but, it's seen as this kind of wild moment in alpinism now, the quote unquote magnificent failure. I don't know if you've it wouldn't be nearly as well known if we'd succeeded. Exactly. I mean, that's something I think Jim might have said as well. And maybe it's Michael said it to me, but yeah. And can you explain maybe leading up to that and what you guys tried to do and why it seemed so radical?
Well,
or was it in your mind?
I guess I didn't think it was that radical, in the sense that we took a lot of gear, we took a lot of ropes, we moved slowly, we did a capsule style. And, I'd sort of evolved from a winter mountaineering in the Tetons, which is a pretty high standard. It gets really cold and it gets really windy. And, I climbed through storms on the West Face with Jeff Lowe, for example. We did the first winter ascent of the West Face, the Grand Teton. That's a really good prep. And then I'd been to the Canadian Rockies, and I'd done North Twin. And North Twin was probably closer to the edge than I ever was.
Oh, we got to go back to that too.
Than I ever was on Latak.
Okay.
And I think I was probably closer to the edge with Michael Kennedy on the Infinite Spur on Foraker.
Was that before Latak, or that was after?
That was before.
Oh, it was before?
Yes.
Okay,
and so
see, my timeline's messed up.
It's just, you sort of build your skill set and your understanding of where you're going in the mountains. I mean, if you look at it logically, the Tetons had the really very cold conditions and fairly big routes, and then the Canadian Rockies are the next step up from that. And then Alaska is obviously the next frontier. And again, everything's unclimbed. It was a fabulous time to be it was a golden age. Mm-hmm. The peaks have been all summited, but, there are very few routes on them. And, Michael and I just had two because Jeff had broken his ankle on Hunter. So we had to get him off that. And after Michael and I finished off Hunter, we said, well, what are we going to do? We can climb the Casine Ridge, which we figured was, well, we could probably do this no problem. Or we'd try the Infinite Spur. And we decided we'd try the Infinite Spur. And we went fairly heavy by today's standards. Which meant that we were able to sit out a couple quite big storms. But if one of those storms had lasted a week, we might not have made it. And it was, you're 3,000 meters up at the summit from the base of the climb, and you got a big storm there, you'll be in trouble. 2,500 meters, say, on the Hanging Glacier. If that storm that came in had lasted 2 weeks, probably wouldn't have made it. I mean, they don't usually last that long, but they can. And so that was the sort of logical progression of how you you don't push that close to your limit till you know about it, and your limit keeps extending because your skill set gets greater in terms of evaluating the weather, evaluating the terrain, how far you can get in a day, how much sleep you need to have, what sort of food, the stove technology we were improving. We had hanging stoves. All those sorts of things make a big difference. And on Latok, we had something that equivalent to the Bibler tent that my cousins had made through Lowe Alpine Systems. And, our equipment was getting a little bit better, and we were getting better in terms of our judgment. And so Latok didn't have any really hard climbing. It didn't.
I'm not laughing at you. Just, yeah. The
was,
listenership just was like, whoa, okay.
Well, it was hard,
right.
But it was never like I thought I was.
Super tech, yeah.
I didn't think I would. I didn't ever feel like I was right on the edge of taking a long fall.
Sure.
Or even a short fall. Right. And we just didn't fall. And there were some places under the Cornice Ridge that bothered me in terms of objective hazard, but temperatures happened to be reasonable on the days we were there, so we weren't getting any melding causing the cornices to come off. And we stayed well away from them. So if Jeff hadn't got sick in the high camp, I think we might have had reasonable odds, certainly of finishing the pillar. I think we would have finished. We were only 100 meters from the top of the pillar or so.
That's incredible.
But he got sick. Well, you got to get everybody down. That's more important. And the nice thing about it is that I think at that point in time, Michael and I were probably in a little bit better physical condition than Jim in terms of the impact of the altitude and everything. I suspect we could have gotten to the top of the pillar, if not to the summit of the peak, because the weather wasn't horrendous. It was just bad.
Okay.
Well, but the winds weren't really high, which is a big driver. It was snowing, and it wasn't nice, but it wasn't really bad.
Right.
But Jeff was, he was clearly very, very hypoxic.
Right.
And his face was blue, and you can't leave somebody and go to the summit and hope that they will get better at altitude.
Right.
You just have to go down. And it was the right thing for us to go down because we needed all the energy we had to get him down alive. And that was the important thing.
Sure.
We all came back. We're still friends. We love getting out together until Jeff died, of course.
Right.
But,
still 2-3 decades of climbing together.
Right. It was it was a lot of rappels, but, you take 4 days to do 80 rappels. It's not that far each day. And because we had, we were very short on food, but we had enough food, despite the fact we have some big storms that we could get down. And, we were really hungry when we got down, but we were okay.
Right.
It wasn't like we were totally depleted. I don't think we were that close to the edge on that particular thing, except for Jeff getting sick. And the other nice thing about it is we had fun.
Yeah.
It was such a glorious place to be.
So
Not that it was fun all the time.
Right. I was going to ask you kind of a question about, 17 days. That's how long you were up there?
No, we were up there 26 days.
Okay, 26 days.
26 or 28, something
17
like that.
turned around But nevertheless,
17 days of food.
Oh, that's right. Okay. 17 days of food. Is your intellect or your sort of emotional landscape of of the way you operate? Do you find that you have any tricks in terms of this, just getting through and day to day, being up and on that level of commitment?
Well, again, it wasn't the level of commitment in terms of what I was having to do each day.
Right.
Was not that high. There were long runouts. There were, we were climbing mixed ground where you would long distance between pieces in some cases. I remember being out 20 or 30 meters in one case. And it wasn't easy climbing, but I wasn't worried. It felt controlled. And the nice thing about the ruse, it mostly sheds to the sides.
Sure.
You're on a ridge, so you're probably getting rockfall or icefall is greatly reduced by that. And so I didn't think at the time because we're going slowly, capsule style, we had enough back reserves that I never felt terribly uncomfortable until Jeff got sick.
Okay, yeah.
And then I felt terribly uncomfortable.
One of the people who posted on Facebook actually quoted you from an article of Mountain Magazine. The quote, and I may have messed it up when I wrote it down, but this is essentially it. It says that you said, bigger, harder with fewer people does not necessarily imply better, in that you weren't exactly sure that the what you had done had sort of justified the risk. That kind of philosophy follow you through climbing in terms of, as this, you commented on like this lighter, faster thing, and it sounds like you have a little bit of, what's the word I'm looking for? You're a little circumspect about its, the direction that it went.
I have been uncomfortable with some of the deaths we've had recently.
Okay.
Really. I was in Pakistan when Kyle and Scott disappeared. They just gone up on the climb when we reached base camp, and I flew in the helicopter, and I found it, they'd gone really light, to the point that they weren't carrying Jumars. They didn't have any radio communication. I don't know whether they had the ability to get weather, which you can do these days. I'd never go on something like that without having weather these days, because I believe in using the tools that you have available, and I have lost too many young friends. And I've lost a lot of my older friends. Nick Escort disappeared. Mick Burke disappeared. The people I climbed with in Chamonix and in the Himalaya. And so, in that sense, I very, very much agree with what I was saying there, that bigger is not necessarily better. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, the experience I had on Everest in '83 with the team that we had was, I didn't think you can't anticipate effects of altitude as well as you might. We had a superb team that really got along, and everybody worked at getting everybody up the mountain, and that was the goal. And, we still have a reunion every 5 years, kind of like the old KT2 team got together, and we're still wonderful friends. And so that big mountain experience, despite the fact we did fixed ropes and all that sort of stuff, it was a glorious place to be, and with the technology that I'm not even sure that people could do it alpine style today, given the difficulty of the climbing on the lower buttress. But it will be done someday. People always get better, They always get better, which is great. But so some of these big things, Latok and Everest were great. And one of the things is you have to learn to turn around. You have to be so aware. And, I was on K2 with Steve Swenson and Alex Lowe at the high camp in 1986 on the North Ridge. And I worked a little bit too hard fixing line to get back across to the high camp. Above the Hanging Glacier, there's a steep traverse there. I'd fix some line. Then I got back to the tent. I didn't feel very good. I awakened in the middle of the night, and I could just hear a little bit of rasping in the bottom of my lungs. I said, I'm going down. And Steve said, I've seen pulmonary edema before. You're doing fine. You're talking fine. You've got plenty of energy. I said, I'm going down. I can hear it. It's not right. And he and Alex went for the summit the next day, and I went down as soon as I awakened and recognized that I had it. And that was one advantage. We did have some fixed ropes, and I met Catherine Furr in the next camp. She wasn't feeling good either. We had some oxygen. We breathed a little bit of the oxygen, and then we just headed down. And I got down to 17,000 feet that day. And that took care of the pulmonary edema, and the doctor said I had it. Well, you gotta know, you gotta get the experience with all that time that you've spent in the mountains to recognize what your body's doing and recognize when you're pushing yourself over the limit. Mm-hmm. And, I can't claim that I'm not lucky, but I've tried to be careful. Right. Because I don't want to miss another 30 years of climbing. Right, exactly.
That's a good way to think about it, right? Well, there seems to always be a discussion about ego, sort of ego-driven climbing. It's kind of both seen, I think, as sort of, there's a good and a bad. Like the good is that you have to have ego to think that you can climb something that's never been climbed before. You're the person who, even if somebody else failed, I can do it, even if they failed. The bad part is when it's really driving a lot of what you do to the point of crossing lines. Do you think that you've had a pretty good relationship with that idea of, wanting to succeed at all costs, or even like a trip to K2? I mean, I think there's an influence when I've put so much effort into getting to this point. Why don't I go that extra 150 meters on Laytok? Or why don't, you know what I mean? There's all these influences. So where's your philosophy with that? Or have you ever been caught out, you think, by some of those influences that maybe you regretted afterwards?
I'd probably more likely get caught out by it now because I'm not judging how rapidly I'm declining.
Okay.
By the way, when Alex and Steve got to within maybe 150 or 200 meters of the top and they saw the storm coming, they came down. That was the year that everybody died on the other side.
Okay.
And so, once again, the climbers, I've been very fortunate to go to these people who say, hey, it doesn't matter if I get to the summit.
Right.
And yeah, it'd be really nice for my ego, but again, it's so important to come back. But getting back to the ego thing, yeah, I'm egotistical to some extent, but I've never been a really good climber. I've been very determined, and I've been able to conceive of how things can conceivably be put together. But I'm not technically a great climber. Never have been. Never climbed 512 in my life. Hardly ever climbed 511 in my life. I have managed to get up a couple of 511s, but I just don't climb it I'm not that good of an athlete. But I'm predetermined, and I think I can make fairly reasonable decisions. And I was insecure growing up because I was, one of these dorks. Still am a dork in terms of a geek, however you want to call it.
Climbing is well populated with
well, it has been, but less so now, I think. Yeah,
it's more athletic.
And,
for sure.
I was getting a lot of satisfaction out of other things in my life. It didn't matter, if I put together... in recent years, I put together some things at work that I think really made a difference to what our project was trying to do.
Right, the goal.
Well, that feels as good or maybe even better, getting to the top of an unclimbed peak. We've done something that hasn't been done before that's technically hard to do, and it's made a difference to our country. And so that's important to me too. And I have a family to come back to, and, my kids are really important to me. Mm-hmm. And the one ex that's still alive is a good friend, and it's important you come back and you don't, people, I've seen what the significant others of climbers who've died, it has an enormous impact on them, and it's just, it's not fair to them either. It's not fair to you. And so I think it's terribly important that you recognize that, it's just a mountain. And if you get your ego so tied to succeeding in the mountain, that isn't a good way to live your life. It's important to achieve. Don't misunderstand me. But it shouldn't be driven, I have to do this so much better than anybody else.
Right.
Are you having a good time? Alex, who's the best climber in the world? It's the guy who's having the most fun, was his reply. Well, I'm not sure that's completely true, but it's a very good thought to keep in mind, because climbing is most of the time, not always, I've suffered a lot, been joyful.
Right.
It's fun to solve the problems, just like it's fun to solve the problems at work. And solving the problems gives me a lot of gratification. The fact I didn't finish I think I finished in terms of the solving the problem. I'd finished Laytok. I didn't get to the summit. Don't get credit. Don't care. I would have liked to have done it. Don't misunderstand me. But we did the best we could have done under the circumstances.
Right.
That's good enough.
Yeah.
You can't do better than that. So I think it's a little bit too ego-driven, and these people who But that's my opinion.
Right. What about, what about like the entrance of heavy sponsorship, career kind of driven climbing? Is that ever, the idea of that ever bothered you, or do you feel like it has an undue influence on anything?
I do.
Right.
And I was fortunate that I had an adequate income that I could go on these trips. It's not that I didn't get money from people. The trips weren't terribly expensive in a lot of cases. I think La Talk was $8,000 or something like that, which is cheap as the dickens. But when you have to do something to keep your sponsor happy, I'm so fortunate that I never had to do that. I could decide what I wanted to do, not what I thought they wanted me to do. I am exceptionally happy that I was never driven by that. I didn't have to make that. I'm an amateur climber. That's the joyful way to climb or ski or whatever. You make decisions about what seems right for you.
So let me ask you a couple of questions. You sort of, I think, half jokingly, you've already about like, well, what are we going to talk about? Some of the things I've forgotten. And that's, that you can sort of chalk that up to age, but I've forgotten so many things that I've climbed. But is there a climb or a situation or whatever, an experience that maybe we don't know about as like history buffs of George Lowe's name on, that you could think of that like strikes you as maybe a perfect climb or a perfect moment or even a perfect partnership?
Maybe the best day I ever spent in the mountains, wasn't really in the mountains, is when I climbed the nose with Alex Lowe. And neither of us had climbed it. It was an on-site. It was back in the 90s. I can't even remember the year. Mm-hmm. And Alex obviously is a much better climber than I am. And we just walked up to the thing early in the morning, not really having, we studied the route to some extent, and we climbed it. And Alex was so exuberant and joyful being there, and the feeling of moving rapidly up those incredible dihedrals up high on him. It was just one of those days that, oh my God, can it get this good ever again? Just because the climbing, it was just pure fun. And doing it with Alex because he was the best climber in the world, because he was having the most fun. Mm-hmm. It was just a delightful day. And, we got back before it was dark, and Alex, of course, wanted to go climb some god-awful 511D plus. Can't remember, on one of the domes the next day. Fortunately, we got lost driving to the campground. And didn't get up early enough to do it, because I'm not sure I could have done it.
You wanted a rest day.
I wanted a rest day. But, it's just one of these, wow, this is the way to go out about things.
Right.
I was reasonably good then. I certainly couldn't keep up with Alex, but we shared leads, and it was just so much fun. And, the valley's it's a low risk. We weren't going fast enough like just modern speed climbers that would take horrendous falls, or we all didn't have to worry about falling on the ledges and things or the flake. So it was just one of those days in the mountains as a single day that I thought was pretty phenomenal. But then I had a great day last fall. And I climbed a 5.6 on the west ridge of Kness with Jack Tackle. And turned out, because the winds were blowing pretty hard when we were approaching it, nobody else was there. And, almost 800 meters of climbing, but the rock is perfect and the scenery is incredible. And we just moved, and it was great fun. It was just, it doesn't have to be hard, but if you're in the right place in the mountains with the right person, I think I get more joy out of doing something like that than Jack is another great guy to go in the mountains with. Those are the days probably that are the most joyful that I can, that really stand out in my memory.
Well, let me flip the question around a little bit. And you mentioned, I was talking about Lowe Talk, and you sort of, I don't know if it's downplayed, but just more of it explained how it wasn't quite as out there as other stuff you've done. So do you have a moment that has become either a personal or even a cautionary tale that you tell to anybody else where you maybe found yourself, out there too far and,
Hey, yeah.
Whether it's like
With Jack last summer.
Oh, okay.
We went up to Clyde Minaret and didn't get an early enough start, so we camped too low below it. And, I'm getting real old and slow, and we, the climbing on it's one of the 50 crowded classics. And we managed to do the route fine, but we got lost a couple of times, and we got to the top, and it was September, mid-September. Days were a little bit short, and it was starting to get dark. And I think I had the coldest bivvy perhaps of my career, and because we had underestimated the mountain given our current skill level. And so you have to adjust for whatever your skill level is at the time. I was really cold, and Jack was really cold. And it was, am I going to stop shivering before morning? This will not be good. And now it wasn't quite that bad, but it was very, very uncomfortable. Not that I got any frostbite or anything, but I was pushing it too close to the edge, and it's because I need to be aware of what my skills are now compared to what they were then. I mean, 10 years ago, that would have been no big deal. Maybe.
That's pretty wild that you're still learning these things at this point in your climbing career.
Well, but my skill level is changing.
Right.
And my endurance level is changing, and it's not as good as it was. And that's okay. Right. It doesn't mean it's less fun. I just have to understand where my current limits are. It's hard to let go of the stuff that you were able to do in the past.
Mm-hmm. As a climber, I look back, and the people who posted online for this look back and think George Lowe changed climbing in a lot of ways. Again, another podcast eye roll just came across for the people who can't see us right now. So I guess to sort of answer my question, but I'll ask it anyway. But I mean, did you ever do a climb or, again, have an experience that you felt like, this is a pretty big deal? I mean, you sort of shot down Laytok is that big a deal, but did you ever have that or feel like, wow, I'm actually like approaching into some places that people haven't really gone before in terms of skill or commitment or any of those things? I mean, the North Twin to me comes in.
North Twin was close to that,
yeah.
And I think Foraker was fairly close to. I mean, Laytok was in the sense that we took on something that was beyond what people were trying to do at the time. Although, we had a lot of debates, and Jeff wanted to go pure alpine style. And I don't think we would have gotten very far with that because the weather was pretty bad at times, and there were enough. There wasn't enough time, long enough time period of good weather probably.
Right.
Especially since you didn't have good forecasts. But I think all of those were maybe comparable to what other people in the world were doing. Maybe I don't know.
I brought up the North Twin just now because it's been said on here before, but I've seen it. It was actually kind of a turning point for me because I kind of imagined that I was going to go with a buddy of mine and repeat the Blanchard route, Blanchard Cheeseman route. Joke is that literally within like 45 seconds of seeing the mountain, because you can't see it on the approach.
Right.
I was like,
You come up over Woolly Shoulder.
Yeah, Woolly Shoulder.
Like, whoa.
Like gasping, climbing your ass up that thing with a big pack on up the scree. Yeah, and I was just like, no, this is it. And, looking back now, it may have been the point where I was like, yeah, you know what, I don't even know if I'm cut out for anything even close to that. So I kind of imagine a George Lowe early 30s, maybe late 20s at that point.
Yeah, I was 30 then.
Okay. I mean, the audaciousness of thinking that you could climb that face, I think to me is pretty astounding. And where that kind of like, I don't know, if what you want to call it comes from is a pretty wild place. I mean, do you have any memories of what sparked that in your brain? Who did you? Chris Jones?
Chris Jones, yeah. Who is just a and Chris.
And maybe it was his idea. Do you have any recollection?
No, it was. I think that one was my idea. Well, I'd done Alberta. I'd seen it before. I'd done Alberta with Jock Liddon, and that had been a really fun climb for me. That's a really good route. But if the ice field's still there. I mean, it would be just kitty litter if the ice field's melted off. But that's a really good climb because the rock on the upper part is quite good. And by the way, the rock on North Twin is a lot better than you might expect. The ledges, I mean, you get the first thing off the ground, it was really nice, beautiful, steep limestone with good pro. Then you get up the ledge where the glacier is, and it's got little patches of ice and pebbles and so on. The dangerous places are the low angle ones. So it wasn't, I think I was probably pushing them probably harder than I should have at that point, if that answers your question.
Yeah. I mean, it does too. It's an interesting mindset where I saw it and was like scared silly. You're climbing on Mount Alberta. It's over your left.
It's over. It's further west.
Yeah. But you're looking, it's there behind you and you're thinking like, well, this is fun, but look at that thing over there. Like that's a cool, and again, back to this sort of ego thing of in a good way, you're like, I'm strong enough, powerful enough, I can come back and try that thing over there while I ran tail, so, I just like to think about those.
You probably had better judgment.
Yeah. Who knows?
Because we were pretty pushed on that.
Right,
the weather was pretty bad, and because we had a moderate amount of snow, we were on the route, and then it was really stormy the day we summited, and we had probably 30 centimeters of snow on the tent in the morning, and we had one package of freeze-dried food left. And that's closer to the edge than I should have gone, and I took 60 foot fall. Right.
Oh, yeah, that's the edge.
That's the edge.
Getting there.
Where we were almost out of gear because we had to go to the top at some point. So it wasn't necessarily that it was using good judgment. It was the only way we could get off the mountain because we didn't have enough gear to repel the whole thing. Because we dropped some stuff and I just don't think we could have gotten down it. And the crux at the top were I had to go around the place I fell. When I fell on the thing, I pulled a critical piece, and it was a tied off piton, and of course it came off loose, and so that was gone, and had to find another way to do it. Yeah, that was pushing it. All right, that was probably the closest.
You've reflected a bit on age, as we've been talking. You're two examples of learning even this late in the game from climbing. So a couple things reflecting on your career and what's going on now comparatively. Is there somebody in the last 20 years or a couple people that you feel like either you would have loved to climb with or has accomplished things that you sort of feel like are something that either impresses you or is in the kind of realm or style of something that you actually are like, wow, that's what I believe in. That's what I think is cool in terms of alpinists.
That's a really interesting question because I don't track what's going on in climbing so much. I'm busy enough at work. Right. I have family. I do other things. I still like to ski a lot. I was down skiing in Antarctica, get my last continent this last November. Cool. And I do a lot of, I've done some long backcountry ski tours, which I still love doing. I have all these other activities, canyoneering, backpacking with my daughters. I'd a lot rather go do things and read about things. And so if you ask me about who's really good...
well, what about even folks you crossed paths with? Maybe never got back to hitting up to do some climbing with?
Well, I spent some time with Marco in Slovenia this spring after we did a family bike ride there.
Preslek, or however you pronounce it.
Yeah. And, he's done an incredible number of things. He has a delightful spouse. He has a beautiful house, really nice kids, and he's an incredible host. It's one of those mixtures of people that you just don't see very often. He's phenomenal. And it was just a joy to be out in the mountains with him. So he's one of the people who I would have liked to have, I did a little bit of climbing with him there, but I would have liked to be in the mountains with him. I mean, there are other people like Steve Swenson who just keeps climbing hard forever.
Right.
Or Mark Ritchie. I look at Mark Ritchie, and Mark is an incredibly successful businessman. He did all the woodwork for Apple headquarters. That's probably more impressive than any of the climbing he's done.
Right.
And the guy's got one of the most impressive climbing records in the world.
Right.
Both Steve and Mark had really good careers. Mark has this phenomenal thing. He's got a 1 megawatt windmill on his driving his wood factory, and he's done all the latest stuff. I mean, he's got a great family. Teresa is just a wonderful woman, and his daughter's delightful. And those are the people that I really admire. The ones I admire are the ones who can manage a life outside of climbing that involves professional careers and families where they haven't left their families totally alone. And I to be fair to my families, I spent way too much time in the mountains.
Right.
And I think that caused problems with Liz, who's a wonderful person. And my first spouse, we wasn't a good match, but I was probably too selfish. Mm-hmm. Mark seems to be able to balance that a lot better than I did. So I have, or Tom Hornbein has, and Marco was. I watched his family, and it was just wonderful. So those are the one. That's the type of person that I probably admire most in the climbing community. But again, I don't do it. I can't keep up on. Well, I'm not interested in keeping up on the literature.
Right.
I don't do it. I don't climb for that reason. I climb because I climb and do all these other activities outside because it gives me great pleasure doing it. And I climbing the Grand Teton this summer with my daughter Melissa and watching her do her second trad lead just on the second pitch of the Ekstrom Ridge and going up that thing and watching her adapt to the terrain. And that was just another one of those best climbs of your life. Just because watching her grow to be able to handle that situation with huge crowds, and she's managing to find her way up a mountain that she'd never done before, find the route. And she hadn't done this before. But it was a joy to be there and share that with her. And those are the type of things that are more important to me than, I did the hardest 5:15 yet it's been done. Not that I don't admire these people. Mm-hmm. I mean, the amount of work you have to do climb at this 5:15 or whatever the top level is now is phenomenal. And I greatly admire the skill. But I admire even more those people who can do, that are sort of Renaissance type people who can manage. And I haven't managed that nearly well enough. I've been divorced twice, so that's not a very good example. You can't give me credit for doing well there.
So anything on the plate?
Oh, well, yeah, of course. I mean, there's so many places that I haven't been.
Right.
I mean, just going to Antarctica, wasn't climbing, it was skiing, right. but I enjoy skiing as much as I do climbing, so it's that's fine. Right now I'm a little bit falling short because I don't know how long my knee is going to have. I probably have a meniscus or something
right.
that I tore when I was trying to climb in Patagonia. Don't know. I mean, this was 6 or 8 weeks ago. So I was just going to.
So you were down climbing in Patagonia 8 weeks ago?
Well, I went to Patagonia after I went to Antarctica because I just visited Chaltern on the way, and then we got 7.5 days of driving rain, but still incredible hiking.
Right.
We got to see one of these giant red-headed woodpeckers when I was hiking through the Langa forest, so that was good too.
Right on.
It's all of these things, and I got to try Guillemets, and I was too slow. But anyway, I got to see Fitzroy in the blue skies. If I had one thing I'd like to do right now, it'd be Fitzroy, but I don't think I can get strong enough. I mean, it's such a beautiful peak.
Well, awesome. Well, thanks a lot for sitting down. This has been tremendous. And again, Thanks for having me in your home. I'm glad we're not trying to do this outside right now. It's like
You wouldn't hear anything other than the wind.
It's pretty loud out there. So, but yeah, thanks so much.
You're welcome.
And the time is really appreciated.
I hope it's valuable for your listeners.
Yeah, well, they'll let me know, and I'm sure it's going to be. So, thanks again.
Okay, you're welcome.
All right, folks, thanks for listening, and thanks to George for having me up to his place, sitting down, being so forthcoming. And if you head over to normacast.com, I've posted a gallery of photos that Michael Kennedy sent me from his vast collection, which he's been going through of late and digitizing a lot of stuff. And he sent me over some amazing old pictures of him and George in their adventures in Alaska and Laytok. And of course, while you're there, click on the Help Out tab or stop by the shop. Okay, folks, as George said, he survived with a lot of luck, with some pretty good decisions here and there, and of course, paying attention all the time. So, what that means is, among other things, check your knots.
Come far, pilgrim.
Feels like far.
Were it worth the trouble?
What trouble?